In a world where every gesture of royalty is watched by millions, where a simple wave can make headlines and a smile can trend on social media, one small boy's choice between a high five and a handshake revealed something extraordinary about the future of the British monarchy. It was supposed to be just another royal engagement, another carefully planned public appearance where everything would go according to protocol. But, sometimes, the most authentic moments happen when a 9-year-old prince decides to follow his instincts instead of expectations. What unfolded that day wasn't just about proper etiquette or royal training, it was about a young boy learning to navigate his own path while carrying the weight of a 1,000-year-old institution on his small shoulders. The cameras were rolling, the crowd was watching, and, in that split second of decision, Prince George showed the world that even future kings can choose their own way of connecting with people. This is the story of how one simple gesture sparked conversations about tradition, authenticity, and what it really means to be royal in the modern world. The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as the Wales family prepared for what would become one of the most talked about royal engagements of the year. Prince William adjusted his navy blazer one final time while Catherine smoothed down Charlotte's dress, the same shade of blue that had become synonymous with royal elegance. But it was Prince George, standing quietly by the window overlooking the castle grounds, who seemed lost in thought about the day ahead. At 9 years old, George had already attended dozens of royal events, each one carefully choreographed to present the perfect image of the modern monarchy. He understood the rules: smile when appropriate, wave to the crowds, speak when spoken to, and always remember that millions of people around the world were watching. These weren't just family outings, they were performances where every detail mattered, from the color of his shoes to the way he held his hands at his sides. The event they were preparing for was the annual Commonwealth Day celebrations, a tradition that brought together representatives from across the former British Empire to celebrate shared values and ongoing partnerships. For the royal family, it represented one of the most important ceremonies of the year, showcasing Britain's continuing influence on the global stage. Prince George knew that his presence there wasn't just as a child accompanying his parents, but as the future heir to the throne, second in line after his father. As the family's motorcade made its way through the streets of London, George pressed his face against the window, watching the crowds that had gathered along the route. People of all ages had come out to catch a glimpse of the royals, many holding small Union Jack flags or flowers to present. Children his own age stood on their parents' shoulders, waving excitedly as the cars passed by. It was a scene that George had witnessed countless times, but somehow it never became ordinary. Catherine noticed her son's contemplative mood and reached over to straighten his tie. "Remember, George, today is about celebrating all the different countries that are part of our Commonwealth family. You'll meet children from many different places, and they're all very excited to see you." Prince William added from the front seat, "Just be yourself, but remember your manners. These events are important for showing people who we are as a family." The weight of expectation wasn't lost on young George. Even at his age, he understood that he represented something much larger than himself. Every photograph taken, every interaction captured on video, would be analyzed and discussed by people he would never meet. The pressure of living up to an idealized version of royalty was something he was still learning to navigate, balancing the natural impulses of childhood with the formal requirements of his position. When they arrived at Westminster Abbey, the magnitude of the event became clear. Hundreds of dignitaries, Commonwealth representatives, and media personnel had gathered for the ceremony. The ancient stone walls of the Abbey, which had witnessed centuries of royal history, seemed to whisper reminders of the continuity and tradition that George was expected to uphold. His great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had attended this same ceremony for over 70 years before her passing, and now it fell to the new generation to carry forward these traditions. As the family made their way into the Abbey, George walked between his parents, his small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the Gothic architecture above. The sound of organ music filled the space as they took their seats in the front row, surrounded by other members of the royal family. Princess Charlotte, only 7 years old, seemed more at ease with the formality of the occasion, while 4-year-old Prince Louis had been left at home due to his young age and unpredictable behavior at public events. The ceremony itself was a carefully orchestrated celebration of diversity and unity. Representatives from across the Commonwealth read passages highlighting the shared values that bound their nations together, while musical performances showcased the rich cultural heritage of different regions. George listened attentively as speakers talked about the importance of young people in shaping the future of the Commonwealth, knowing that his own role in that future was already predetermined. During the service, George's attention was drawn to a group of children seated nearby, young ambassadors from various Commonwealth countries who had been invited to participate in the ceremony. They came from places he had only read about in school: Jamaica, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and many others. Each child represented not just their own nation, but the hopes and dreams of millions of young people across the Commonwealth who looked to the royal family as symbols of continuity and leadership. As the formal ceremony concluded and the family prepared to move to the reception area, George mentally prepared himself for what he knew would be the most challenging part of the day, the meet and greet sessions where he would be expected to interact naturally with strangers while maintaining perfect composure. These interactions were crucial for the royal family's public image, showing them as approachable and genuinely interested in the people they served. The reception hall buzzed with conversation as guests mingled, sharing stories from their home countries and discussing the future of the Commonwealth. George stayed close to his parents, observing the easy way his father engaged with diplomats and dignitaries, making each person feel as though they were the most important person in the room. Catherine moved gracefully between groups, her genuine interest in people's stories evident in the way she listened intently to every conversation. When it came time for George to begin his own rounds of introductions, he felt the familiar flutter of nerves that always accompanied these formal interactions. Unlike his father, who had decades of experience in royal diplomacy, George was still learning how to balance authenticity with protocol. He wanted to be genuine in his interactions, but he also knew that every gesture would be scrutinized and interpreted as either appropriate or lacking in royal dignity. The first few conversations went smoothly. George shook hands with elderly Commonwealth officials who spoke fondly of meeting his great-grandmother years earlier. He listened politely as they shared stories of their countries and expressed their hopes for continued cooperation with Britain. Each interaction followed the same pattern: formal introductions, polite conversation, and carefully orchestrated photo opportunities that would later appear in newspapers around the world. But, as the reception continued, George began to notice something that made him increasingly uncomfortable. While the adults seemed content with these formal exchanges, the children present appeared restrained and nervous, clearly instructed to follow strict protocols when meeting him. They stood stiffly when introduced, spoke only when asked direct questions, and seemed afraid to show any natural childhood enthusiasm in his presence. This observation troubled George more than he could articulate. Despite being raised with an understanding of royal protocol, he was still fundamentally a child who valued genuine connections over formal ceremonies. He had friends at school who treated him normally, engaging in playground games and casual conversations without the weight of centuries of tradition hanging over every interaction. The contrast between those relationships and these formal encounters highlighted the complex nature of his dual existence as both a normal child and a future king. As the reception progressed, George found himself increasingly drawn to a group of young Commonwealth ambassadors who were standing near the refreshment table, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the grandeur of their surroundings. These children, ranging in age from 8 to 12, had been selected to represent their countries at the ceremony, but they seemed more interested in the elaborate cakes and pastries than in making formal conversation with dignitaries. Prince William noticed his son's interest in the young ambassadors and gently guided him toward their group. "George, I'd like you to meet some very special young people who've traveled a long way to be here today." The introduction was meant to be a highlight of the event, a moment where the future king would connect with the next generation of Commonwealth citizens in a way that would symbolize the continuing bonds between Britain and its former colonies. As they approached the group, George could see the children straightening up, clearly having been coached on how to behave when meeting royalty. Their natural chatter ceased, replaced by nervous silence as they prepared to follow whatever protocol they had been taught for this moment. One of their chaperones quickly stepped forward to facilitate the introductions, speaking in the formal tone that George had come to associate with these official interactions. The setup was perfect for what the organizers had envisioned, a charming exchange between children that would demonstrate the friendliness and approachability of the modern royal family. Photographers positioned themselves discreetly around the group, ready to capture the moment that would later be shared across social media and news outlets worldwide. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing a carefully planned piece of royal theater, designed to reinforce positive associations with the monarchy. What no one anticipated was that Prince George was about to make a decision that would reveal more about his character than any scripted interaction ever could. As he approached the group of young ambassadors, he was thinking not about protocol or photo opportunities, but about how to connect with these children as genuinely as possible. The choice he was about to make would surprise everyone present and spark conversations about authenticity, tradition, and the evolving nature of royal engagement in the 21st century. The moment Prince George reached the group of young Commonwealth ambassadors, time seemed to slow down in the way that significant moments often do. The first child he was introduced to was Marcus, a 10-year-old from Jamaica whose bright smile and confident demeanor immediately caught George's attention. Marcus had been chosen to represent his country not just because of his academic achievements, but because of his natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life. As the formal introduction began, Marcus did something unexpected. Instead of offering the traditional handshake that had been rehearsed with his chaperones, he enthusiastically extended his hand for a high five, his face lighting up with genuine excitement at meeting someone close to his own age. The gesture was spontaneous and authentic, reflecting the casual, friendly culture of his homeland where formality often took a backseat to warmth and genuine connection. The reaction in the room was immediate and palpable. The chaperones froze, clearly mortified that their carefully coached young ambassador had deviated from the prescribed protocol. Adult guests nearby turned to watch, some with amusement, others with concern about how the young prince would handle this breach of royal etiquette. The photographers, sensing a potentially newsworthy moment, adjusted their positions to capture whatever was about to unfold. Prince George stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds, looking at Marcus's raised hand waiting for a high five. In that moment, multiple thoughts raced through his young mind. He had been taught that handshakes were the appropriate form of greeting in formal settings, especially during official royal engagements. His parents had emphasized the importance of maintaining dignity and propriety in all public interactions. Yet looking at Marcus's eager face and outstretched hand, George felt a conflict between what he had been taught and what felt natural. Here was another child, roughly his own age, offering friendship in the most genuine way he knew how. To reject that gesture in favor of a more formal handshake would feel like rejecting the person behind it, something that went against George's natural instincts toward kindness and inclusivity. The weight of decision pressed down on the 9-year-old prince. He was acutely aware that dozens of people were watching, that cameras were recording, and that whatever he did next would be analyzed and discussed by people around the world. The choice between a high five and a handshake had become a symbol of something much larger, the tension between tradition and authenticity, between royal protocol and human connection. As George hesitated, he caught sight of his father's face in his peripheral vision. Prince William's expression was carefully neutral, but George had spent enough time reading his father's subtle cues to recognize the slight tension around his eyes. This was clearly not how the interaction was supposed to go according to the event planners, but William was prepared to support whatever decision his son made in the moment. Catherine, standing nearby, offered a barely perceptible encouraging smile that seemed to say, "Trust your instincts." She had always emphasized to her children the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of their background or the formal requirements of any given situation. Her own approach to royal duties had always balanced protocol with genuine human warmth. The seconds stretched on as George weighed his options. He thought about his great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and how she had navigated thousands of similar moments throughout her long reign. She had been known for her strict adherence to protocol, but also for her ability to make people feel valued and respected in her presence. What would she have done in this situation? Marcus, meanwhile, maintained his bright smile and upraised hand, seemingly unaware of the minor crisis his gesture had created among the adults in the room. His natural confidence and friendliness were infectious, and George found himself drawn to the boy's genuine enthusiasm. There was something refreshing about Marcus's straightforward approach to friendship that cut through all the complexity of royal protocol. Finally, Prince George made his decision. Instead of giving Marcus the high five he was clearly hoping for, George gently redirected the interaction by offering his hand for a traditional handshake. But the way he did it was crucial to understanding both his character and the impact of the moment. Rather than coldly rejecting the high five, George smiled warmly and said, "It's really nice to meet you, Marcus. I'd love to shake your hand." The words were spoken with such genuine friendliness that what could have been a rejection felt instead like an invitation to a different kind of connection. George's tone conveyed respect for Marcus as a person while gently guiding the interaction toward a more formal greeting. It was a masterful display of diplomatic skill that would have been impressive coming from an experienced adult, let alone a 9-year-old child. Marcus, quick to read the social cues, immediately adjusted his approach without missing a beat. He grasped George's offered hand in a firm handshake, his smile never wavering. "The pleasure is all mine, Your Royal Highness," he replied, demonstrating his own social intelligence and adaptability. The exchange that followed was warm and natural, with both boys asking each other questions about their schools, interests, and experiences. The watching adults released a collective breath they didn't realize they had been holding. The potential awkwardness of the moment had been navigated with grace by both children, turning what could have been a diplomatic incident into a demonstration of mutual respect and understanding. The photographers captured images of two young boys engaged in genuine conversation, their body language relaxed and friendly despite the formal nature of their greeting. What made the moment particularly remarkable was how George continued to engage with Marcus and the other young ambassadors throughout the remainder of the reception. Rather than treating the handshake as the end of their interaction, he used it as the beginning of meaningful conversations with each child. He asked about their home countries, their schools, and their experiences traveling to London for the ceremony. With Sarah, a 12-year-old from New Zealand, George discussed their shared love of rugby, comparing notes about their favorite teams and players. When he met Ahmad, an 11-year-old from Malaysia, George was genuinely curious about the differences between British and Malaysian schools, asking thoughtful questions about subjects studied and cultural traditions. Each interaction followed the same pattern, a respectful handshake followed by authentic conversation that treated the other child as an equal rather than a subject to be briefly acknowledged. George's approach demonstrated a maturity beyond his years in balancing the requirements of his position with his genuine desire to connect with his peers. Prince William watched these exchanges with visible pride, recognizing in his son's behavior the values he and Catherine had worked so hard to instill. The ability to maintain dignity while showing genuine interest in others was a crucial skill for any member of the royal family, and George was displaying it naturally at an age when many children would have been overwhelmed by the formal setting. The other adults in the room began to take notice of the remarkable interactions taking place. Commonwealth officials who had attended numerous royal events commented among themselves about the natural ease with which the young prince engaged with the children, noting that his approach felt both appropriately respectful and genuinely warm. As word of the interaction began to spread among the guests, different people interpreted the significance of George's choice in various ways. Some saw it as evidence of excellent royal training, proof that the next generation of the monarchy understood how to balance tradition with accessibility. Others viewed it as a glimpse into George's personal character, suggesting that he possessed the emotional intelligence necessary to navigate the complex demands of royal life. The young ambassadors themselves seemed energized by their interactions with Prince George. Rather than the stilted, formal exchanges they had been prepared for, they had experienced genuine conversations with someone who treated them as equals despite the vast differences in their circumstances. Several later commented to their chaperones about how normal and friendly the prince had seemed. But, perhaps the most significant aspect of the entire exchange was how it revealed George's developing understanding of his role and responsibilities. At 9 years old, he was already learning to navigate the delicate balance between personal authenticity and public duty that would define his entire life. The choice between a high five and a handshake had become a microcosm of the larger choices he would face throughout his future reign. As the reception continued and the formal interactions gave way to more relaxed mingling, George found himself reflecting on the exchange with Marcus and the other young ambassadors. He had successfully maintained the dignity expected of his position while still connecting meaningfully with his peers. It was a small victory, but one that gave him confidence in his ability to forge his own path within the constraints of royal protocol. The photographers and videographers present had captured not just a single moment, but a series of interactions that told a larger story about the future of the monarchy. The images and footage would soon travel around the world, sparking discussions about tradition, authenticity, and the evolving nature of royal engagement in the modern era. The news of Prince George's handshake moment spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within hours of the Commonwealth Day ceremony concluding, video clips and photographs of the interaction between the young prince and Marcus were circulating across social media platforms, traditional news outlets, and royal watching websites around the globe. What had seemed like a small moment during a formal reception had somehow captured the public's imagination in a way that surprised even seasoned royal correspondents. The initial reactions were overwhelmingly positive. Social media users praised George's mature handling of the situation, with many commenting on how the 9-year-old had shown wisdom beyond his years in choosing a respectful handshake while still engaging warmly with his peer. Hashtags like #RoyalHandshake and #PrinceGeorgeClass began trending across multiple platforms, with users sharing the clips alongside comments about proper etiquette and respect for different cultures. Royal commentator Victoria Hartwell was among the first to analyze the significance of the moment on her popular blog. "What we witnessed today wasn't just a 9-year-old choosing proper protocol," she wrote. "We saw a future king demonstrating that respect and warmth can coexist, that maintaining dignity doesn't require sacrificing genuine human connection." Prince George's approach to that handshake showed remarkable emotional intelligence for someone his age. The response from Commonwealth countries was particularly noteworthy. In Jamaica, where Marcus lived, local news stations picked up the story as a positive example of diplomatic engagement between the young generation. Marcus himself became something of a local celebrity overnight, with his school organizing assemblies where he shared his experience of meeting the prince and the lessons he had learned about different cultural approaches to greeting and respect. Educational institutions across the Commonwealth began using the interaction as a teaching moment about cultural sensitivity and appropriate behavior in formal settings. Teachers in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand incorporated discussions about the handshake moment into lessons about diplomacy, respect, and cross-cultural communication. The simple exchange between two children had become a case study in how to navigate differences while maintaining mutual respect. However, not all reactions were uniformly positive. Some traditional royal watchers expressed concern that the intense scrutiny of such a small interaction represented an unhealthy level of analysis of a child's behavior. Margaret Thornberry, a royal historian who had covered the monarchy for over 3 decades, cautioned against reading too much significance into what she called a perfectly normal response from a well-raised child. "We must remember that Prince George is still just a 9-year-old boy," Thornberry wrote in her column for the Royal Observer. While his behavior was certainly appropriate and praiseworthy, the level of analysis and praise being heaped upon him for what amounts to basic good manners is perhaps excessive. We should be careful not to create unrealistic expectations or pressure on a child who is still learning and developing. The debate about appropriate levels of public attention on royal children had been ongoing for years, with Prince William and Catherine making efforts to shield their children from excessive media scrutiny while still fulfilling their public duties. The handshake moment highlighted the challenge of this balance, as even positive coverage could contribute to the pressure young royals faced in their public appearances. Within the royal household itself, reactions were mixed but generally supportive. Staff members who had witnessed the interaction praised George's instinctive diplomacy, noting that his response had been both appropriate and genuine. However, there were also discussions about whether the level of public attention the moment had received would create additional pressure on George during future public appearances. Prince William and Catherine held a family discussion that evening about the day's events and the public response they were generating. They wanted to acknowledge George's good behavior while also helping him understand that every public action would likely be scrutinized and discussed by people around the world. It was a delicate conversation about the realities of royal life that many families would never need to have. "You handled yourself very well today, George," his father told him as they sat in the family's private sitting room at Kensington Palace. "The way you treated Marcus and the other children showed real kindness and respect. But you should also know that people are talking about what happened, and that's something you'll need to understand as you get older." Catherine added her own perspective, emphasizing the positive aspects of the interaction while helping George understand the broader context. "What matters most is that you were true to your values while being respectful to everyone you met. That's the most important thing, regardless of what anyone else says about it." George listened to his parents' guidance with the seriousness that had become characteristic of his approach to his royal duties, even at his young age. He was beginning to understand that his actions carried weight beyond their immediate impact, that simple gestures could become symbols of larger ideas about the monarchy and its relationship with the public. The international media coverage continued to expand throughout the week following the Commonwealth Day ceremony. News outlets in countries ranging from India to South Africa picked up the story, often using it as a starting point for broader discussions about the modernization of the British monarchy and its relevance to contemporary Commonwealth relationships. In India, where colonial history created complex feelings about the British royal family, the coverage was particularly nuanced. Some commentators praised George's respectful approach as evidence that the new generation of royals understood the importance of treating all people with dignity, regardless of their background. Others used the moment to discuss the ongoing relevance of the monarchy to former colonial territories and the ways in which royal interactions reflected broader power dynamics. The story also resonated in unexpected places. Child development experts began discussing the interaction as an example of how children can be taught to navigate formal social situations while maintaining authenticity. Parenting blogs picked up the story as a lesson in teaching children about respect, cultural sensitivity, and appropriate behavior in different social contexts. Dr. Amanda Richards, a child psychologist who specialized in social development, wrote an analysis of the interaction for the Journal of Child Development. What Prince George demonstrated was an advanced understanding of social context and emotional intelligence, she noted. His ability to redirect the interaction in a way that maintained respect for both his position and the other child's intentions shows remarkable social skills for a 9-year-old. The ripple effects extended beyond academic and media circles. Etiquette instructors reported increased interest in their services as parents sought to teach their own children how to navigate formal social situations with the same grace that Prince George had displayed. Schools began incorporating more explicit instruction about appropriate greetings and cultural sensitivity into their social studies curricula. Marcus, the young Jamaican ambassador who had initiated the interaction, found himself fielding interview requests from local media outlets eager to hear his perspective on the encounter. In a television interview with Jamaica Broadcasting Corporation, he spoke thoughtfully about the experience and what he had learned from it. "I was really excited to meet Prince George because he's close to my age, so I just acted natural," Marcus explained to the interviewer. "When he wanted to shake hands instead of giving me a high five, I understood that was the proper way to greet someone in his position. But he was still really friendly and asked me lots of questions about Jamaica. It made me feel like he really cared about learning about my country." Marcus's mature reflection on the interaction impressed viewers and added another layer to the public discussion about the encounter. His ability to adapt to the social situation while maintaining his own dignity had been just as noteworthy as Prince George's diplomatic response, though it had received less attention in the initial coverage. The story also sparked conversations about the role of cultural education in preparing young people for international interactions. Commonwealth organizations began developing educational programs designed to help young ambassadors understand different cultural approaches to formal interactions while still encouraging them to express their authentic personalities. Back at Kensington Palace, the Wales family continued to navigate the ongoing attention the handshake moment had generated. While they appreciated the positive nature of the coverage, they were also conscious of the need to protect George from developing an unhealthy relationship with public approval or criticism. The goal was to help him understand his responsibilities while still allowing him to develop naturally as a child. Princess Charlotte, who had witnessed the entire interaction from nearby, offered her own observations during the family's dinner conversation later that week. "George was really nice to all those children," she said with the directness typical of a 7-year-old. "I think he did the right thing because he made everyone feel happy." Her simple assessment captured something important that some of the more complex analyses had missed: the human element of the interaction and its impact on everyone involved. Beyond the discussions of protocol and diplomacy, the encounter had been fundamentally about children connecting with each other across cultural and social boundaries. As the week progressed and media attention began to shift to other royal news, the handshake moment settled into its place as a small but significant chapter in the ongoing story of Prince George's development as a future king. The interaction had provided a glimpse into his character and approach to his royal duties, offering hope that the next generation of the monarchy would be able to balance tradition with genuine human connection. The broader conversations sparked by the moment continued in academic circles, parenting groups, and diplomatic training programs around the world. What had begun as a simple interaction between two children had evolved into a case study in cultural sensitivity, appropriate behavior, and the evolving nature of formal diplomatic engagement in an increasingly connected world. 3 weeks after the Commonwealth Day ceremony, Prince George sat in his favorite reading chair at Kensington Palace, working on a school assignment about Commonwealth countries. The irony wasn't lost on him that his recent experience meeting young ambassadors from these very nations was now helping him with his homework in ways he never could have anticipated. As he wrote about Jamaica's culture and traditions, he found himself thinking about Marcus and wondering what his new friend was doing back home. The assignment had been given to all students in George's year as part of their geography curriculum, but, for George, it held personal significance that his classmates couldn't share. While they researched their chosen countries through books and internet resources, George could draw upon actual conversations he had had with children who lived in these places. The handshake moment that had captured so much public attention had been just the beginning of meaningful exchanges that continued throughout the reception. His teacher, Mrs. Anderson, had noticed the depth and authenticity of George's research compared to his previous assignments on international topics. When he wrote about Malaysian education systems, he included details that could only have come from personal conversation with Ahmad, the young Malaysian ambassador. His description of New Zealand's rugby culture reflected the enthusiastic discussion he had shared with Sarah during the reception. But, perhaps more importantly, the assignment had given George an opportunity to reflect on the lessons he had learned from that day, lessons that extended far beyond geography or cultural knowledge. The choice between a high five and a handshake had been about much more than greeting etiquette. It had been about finding ways to connect with people while respecting both their backgrounds and his own responsibilities. During his lunch break at school, George's closest friend Oliver approached him with a question that had clearly been weighing on his mind. "George, I saw the video of you meeting those kids at the Commonwealth thing. My mum said you handled it really well, but I was wondering why you didn't just give the boy a high five if that's what he wanted?" The question caught George slightly off guard, not because he hadn't thought about it, but because explaining his decision to a peer required him to articulate thoughts and feelings he was still processing himself. Oliver knew about George's royal status, of course, but their friendship had always been based on shared interests in football, video games, and complaining about math homework rather than discussions of royal protocol. "It's complicated," George began, then paused to consider how to explain without sounding pretentious or overly formal. "When I'm at official events, there are certain ways I'm expected to behave. Not because I think I'm better than anyone else, but because I represent something bigger than just myself." "Does that make sense?" Oliver nodded thoughtfully. "Like when I wear my school uniform at inter-school competitions? I have to behave properly because I'm representing our school, not just myself?" "Yes, exactly like that," George responded, relieved that his friend understood the concept. "But the tricky part is trying to be respectful of those expectations while still being genuine with people. Marcus seemed like a really cool kid, and I wanted to be friendly with him, but I also needed to follow the proper protocol for that kind of formal setting." The conversation with Oliver helped George realize that his approach to the handshake moment hadn't been about rejecting Marcus or his cultural background, but rather about finding a way to bridge different expectations and social contexts. He had learned something important about diplomacy. It wasn't about imposing one set of rules over another, but about finding common ground that respected everyone involved. This realization was reinforced when George received an unexpected letter from Marcus himself, forwarded through official channels but written in the casual, friendly tone of a child writing to a new friend. Marcus thanked George for the conversation they had shared and included stories about his school in Jamaica, his favorite subjects, and his dreams of becoming a diplomat when he grew up. "I thought it was really cool how you knew the right way to greet me at the ceremony," Marcus wrote. "My grandmother always taught me that respect can be shown in many different ways, and you showed it perfectly. I hope we can meet again someday and maybe you can visit Jamaica. I would love to show you around my school and teach you some cricket." The letter delighted George and gave him a new perspective on their interaction. Rather than feeling that he had rejected Marcus's initial gesture, Marcus had interpreted George's response as a demonstration of mutual respect. The handshake had been received as an invitation to friendship rather than a formal barrier, which was exactly the outcome George had hoped for but hadn't been sure he had achieved. Prince William found George reading Marcus's letter in his room one evening and took the opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation about the lessons learned from the Commonwealth Day experience. They discussed not just the specific handshake moment, but the broader challenges George would face throughout his life in balancing personal authenticity with public expectations. "The thing you did so well that day," William explained, "was that you found a way to be true to yourself while also being respectful of the situation and the other person. That's going to be one of the most important skills you'll need as you get older and take on more royal responsibilities." William shared stories from his own childhood and early royal duties, describing moments when he had struggled to find that balance between personal desires and public expectations. He talked about times when he had made mistakes, learning experiences that had helped him develop his own approach to royal engagement over the years. "Your great-grandmother always said that being royal is about service, not privilege," William continued. "The handshake you gave Marcus was an act of service because it showed respect for him, for the ceremony, and for the office you'll one day hold. But it was also genuine because it came from your desire to connect with him as a person." Catherine joined the conversation, adding her own perspective on the importance of maintaining empathy and genuine interest in people despite the formal constraints of royal life. She had watched George's interactions throughout the Commonwealth Day reception and had been struck by his natural ability to make the other children feel valued and heard. "What I was most proud of," she told George, "wasn't just that you followed proper protocol, but that you seemed genuinely interested in learning about each child's background and experiences. That curiosity and respect for others will serve you well throughout your life, whether you're meeting world leaders or school children." The conversation helped George understand that the skills he was developing weren't just about royal duty, but about becoming a better person in general. The ability to show respect while maintaining authenticity, to navigate different social contexts while staying true to his values, and to connect with people from diverse backgrounds would benefit him in all aspects of his life. At school, George began to notice opportunities to apply these lessons in smaller, everyday situations. When his class welcomed a new student from Bangladesh, George made an effort to learn about his homeland and help him feel included in class activities. When visiting elderly residents at a local care home as part of a school community service project, George practiced the same approach he had used with the Commonwealth ambassadors: respectful formal greetings followed by genuine conversation and interest in their stories. His teacher, Mrs. Anderson, noticed the change in George's approach to these interactions and commented to Prince William during a parent-teacher conference about George's growing maturity and social awareness. "George has always been a kind child," she noted, "but recently I've observed him taking more initiative in making others feel welcome and included. It's lovely to see that level of emotional intelligence developing in someone his age." The feedback reinforced for William and Catherine that they were on the right track in helping George understand his role and responsibilities. Rather than creating pressure or anxiety about his future position, the lessons learned from experiences like the Commonwealth Day reception were helping him develop confidence and competence in navigating complex social situations. George himself began to recognize that the skills he was developing had practical applications beyond royal duties. During a school debate about environmental policy, he found himself naturally moderating between classmates with different viewpoints, helping them find common ground while ensuring everyone felt heard. The same diplomatic instincts that had guided his handshake with Marcus were proving useful in academic and social situations at school. As the term progressed, George's assignment on Commonwealth countries evolved into a presentation where he shared not just factual information about different nations, but also insights gained from his conversations with the young ambassadors. His classmates were fascinated by his first-hand accounts of learning about different educational systems, cultural traditions, and childhood experiences from around the Commonwealth. The presentation was a success not because of George's royal status, but because of his genuine enthusiasm for the subject matter and his ability to make the information personally relevant and interesting. His teacher praised the depth of research and the personal connections George had made with his material, unaware of the full context of how those connections had been formed. Looking back on the Commonwealth Day experience, George began to understand that the handshake moment had been significant not because of the choice between two different greetings, but because of what it represented about his developing approach to his role and responsibilities. He was learning to navigate the complex balance between tradition and modernity, between formal expectations and genuine human connection, between representing an institution and being true to himself as an individual. The lessons would prove invaluable as George continued to grow and take on increasing royal responsibilities, but, perhaps more importantly, they were shaping him into a thoughtful, empathetic young person capable of meaningful connections with people from all walks of life. The handshake with Marcus had been just the beginning of a learning journey that would continue throughout his preparation for eventual kingship and beyond. 6 months after the Commonwealth Day ceremony, Prince George found himself preparing for another significant royal engagement, but this time his approach was markedly different. As his family readied themselves for the annual garden party at Buckingham Palace, where thousands of guests from across the United Kingdom would gather to celebrate community service and achievement, George felt a confidence and understanding of his role that hadn't existed before his encounter with Marcus and the other young Commonwealth ambassadors. The garden party represented a different kind of challenge from the formal ceremony where the handshake moment had occurred. Rather than a structured event with predetermined interactions, the garden party involved mingling with hundreds of guests in a more relaxed outdoor setting. George would need to navigate countless brief conversations with people of all ages and backgrounds, each interaction requiring him to quickly assess the appropriate level of formality while maintaining genuine interest in each person he met. Catherine noticed the change in George's demeanor as he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. Gone was the nervous energy that had characterized his preparation for previous formal events. In its place was a calm focus that suggested he had internalized important lessons about balancing his royal responsibilities with his natural personality. "How are you feeling about today, George?" she asked, wanting to gauge his emotional state before they departed for Buckingham Palace. "I'm looking forward to it," George replied with surprising confidence. "I've been thinking about what I learned from meeting Marcus and the other Commonwealth children. Today I want to focus on really listening to people and learning about what they do in their communities." This response revealed how profoundly the Commonwealth Day experience had influenced George's understanding of his role. Rather than viewing royal engagements as performances where he had to project a certain image, he had begun to see them as opportunities for genuine connection and learning. The handshake moment had taught him that authenticity and protocol could coexist, and he was eager to apply that lesson in a new context. The garden party itself was a magnificent affair, with the palace grounds transformed into an elegant outdoor reception space. Thousands of guests, all nominated for their contributions to their communities, wandered through carefully manicured gardens while enjoying afternoon tea and the opportunity to meet members of the royal family. For many attendees, this would be their only chance to interact directly with royalty, making each conversation particularly meaningful. As the Wales family moved through the crowds, George immediately put his newfound understanding into practice. When introduced to Mrs. Patricia Williams, an elderly volunteer who had spent 30 years organizing community meals for isolated seniors, George offered a respectful handshake while asking genuine questions about her work and the challenges facing elderly people in her community. The conversation revealed George's developing ability to balance formality with authentic curiosity. He maintained appropriate protocol throughout the interaction while demonstrating real interest in Mrs. Williams' experiences and insights. The elderly volunteer later told reporters that she had been struck by the young prince's maturity and genuine concern for community issues. Similar patterns emerged throughout George's interactions at the garden party. With Dr. James Chen, a community physician who had developed innovative health programs for underserved populations, George asked thoughtful questions about healthcare access and the role of community medicine. When meeting 15-year-old environmental activist Sarah Mitchell, who had organized climate awareness campaigns in her school district, George engaged in a peer-to-peer conversation about environmental challenges while maintaining the respectful tone appropriate for the formal setting. Each interaction demonstrated how the lessons learned from the Commonwealth Day handshake had evolved into a comprehensive approach to royal engagement. George had learned to read social cues quickly, assess the appropriate level of formality for each situation, and find ways to connect authentically with people regardless of their age, background, or social status. Prince William, watching his son navigate these conversations with increasing skill and confidence, reflected on how much George had grown since the Commonwealth ceremony. The handshake moment had been a catalyst for broader learning about diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, and the art of genuine conversation within formal constraints. "George is developing something that can't really be taught," William later confided to Catherine as they watched their son engage with a group of young volunteers.
He's learning to be fully present with each person he meets while still maintaining his dignity and representing our family appropriately.
That balance is something I struggled with for years. The ripple effects of George's evolving approach extended beyond individual conversations at the garden party. Other guests began to notice the quality of his interactions, and positive feedback about his engagement style filtered back to royal staff and, eventually, to media outlets covering the event. However, the coverage this time focused less on any single moment and more on George's overall approach and the maturity he displayed throughout the afternoon. Royal correspondent Elizabeth Hartwell, who had covered the Commonwealth Day handshake story extensively, attended the garden party and noted the evolution in George's public engagement style. What we're witnessing is the development of a young royal who understands that genuine connection with people is not only possible within formal protocols but essential to effective royal service, she wrote in her subsequent article. The story of George's growth resonated particularly strongly with other young people facing their own challenges in balancing authenticity with social expectations. Schools across the Commonwealth began using both the original handshake story and George's continued development as teaching tools for discussions about leadership, cultural sensitivity, and personal growth. Marcus, the young Jamaican ambassador who had initiated the original high-five gesture, had been following news coverage of George's subsequent appearances with interest. When contacted by a journalist writing a follow-up story about the lasting impact of their interaction, Marcus shared his perspective on how their brief encounter had influenced his own approach to formal situations. "Meeting Prince George taught me that respect can be shown in many different ways," Marcus explained in a phone interview. "Since then, I've been more aware of reading social situations and adapting my behavior while still being true to myself. It's helped me in school presentations and when meeting adults in my community work." The mutual learning that had resulted from their interaction highlighted one of the most significant aspects of George's developing approach to royal duties, the recognition that every encounter was an opportunity for growth and understanding, not just for the public meeting royalty, but for the royal family members themselves. Educational institutions began developing curricula around the themes highlighted by George's approach to royal engagement. Programs focusing on cultural competence, adaptive communication, and leadership development incorporated case studies based on the handshake moment and its aftermath. Child development experts praised the way the story demonstrated how young people could learn to navigate complex social expectations while maintaining their authentic selves. Dr. Amanda Richards, who had originally written about the psychological aspects of George's handshake choice, published a follow-up study tracking the long-term impact of the experience on both George and the Commonwealth ambassadors he had met. Her research suggested that meaningful cross-cultural interactions during childhood could have lasting positive effects on social development and cultural understanding. What Prince George demonstrated, and what the young Commonwealth ambassadors learned from the experience, was that respectful engagement across cultural differences requires both cultural awareness and personal authenticity, Dr. Richards concluded. The ability to adapt communication styles while maintaining genuine interest in others is a crucial skill for global citizenship. As the garden party concluded and the Wales family returned to Kensington Palace, George reflected on the afternoon's interactions and how different his approach had become since the Commonwealth Day ceremony. The confidence he now felt in formal social situations was rooted not in rigid adherence to protocol, but in a deeper understanding of how to use proper etiquette as a framework for genuine human connection. During the family's dinner conversation that evening, George shared some of the most meaningful interactions he had experienced at the garden party. He spoke enthusiastically about learning from Mrs. Williams about community service, discussing environmental issues with Sarah, and hearing Dr. Chen's insights about public health challenges. "What I really enjoyed about today," George told his parents, "was how much I learned from the people I met. Each conversation taught me something new about different ways people help their communities. It made me think about how I can better prepare myself to serve people when I'm older." This reflection demonstrated how profoundly George's understanding of royal service had evolved. Rather than seeing his future role as something that would separate him from ordinary people, he was beginning to understand it as an opportunity to learn from and support the diverse communities that made up the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old and observing her brother's growth with typical sibling attention to detail, offered her own assessment of his development. "George is getting really good at talking to grown-ups," she told her parents. "He doesn't seem nervous anymore, and people seem to really like talking to him. Her observation captured something important about the transformation that had begun with a simple choice between a high five and a handshake. George had learned that royal duty didn't require suppressing his personality or maintaining artificial distance from people. Instead, it involved using his position and training to facilitate meaningful connections that could benefit everyone involved. As George prepared for bed that night, he thought about Marcus and wondered how his friend was progressing with his own diplomatic aspirations. The letter they had exchanged had been just the beginning of an ongoing friendship that continued through carefully managed correspondence overseen by both families. Marcus's most recent letter had shared news of his selection for an advanced international studies program at his school, an achievement that George had celebrated with genuine excitement. The lasting impact of their Commonwealth Day encounter extended far beyond their individual friendship. The story of their interaction had become a case study in successful cross-cultural communication, referenced in diplomatic training programs and cultural competence workshops around the world. Young people in particular had embraced the story as an example of how respect and authenticity could coexist in challenging social situations. Looking toward the future, George understood that the lessons learned from his handshake with Marcus would continue to guide his approach to royal duties throughout his life. The ability to balance tradition with genuine human connection, to show respect while maintaining authenticity, and to learn from every interaction would serve him well as he grew into his role as a future king. The simple choice between a high five and a handshake had evolved into something much larger, a foundation for a lifetime of meaningful service and a blueprint for how the monarchy might continue to evolve while honoring its deepest traditions. In learning to navigate that balance, Prince George had not only grown as a future royal but, as a young person prepared to engage thoughtfully and respectfully with the diverse world around him.